You've heard it before. Every scene must go to the next. It sounds clever, promising even. Some people even wrote hundreds of pages pretending that's all it takes to be a so-called story genius. But let's be honest, if that were all it took, everyone would already be a best-selling author. Cause and effect alone won't save your story. What matters here is which kind of scene is causing the next and in what order. Best-selling authors and top screenwriters understand this. The chain isn't random. It's driven by 6 distinct types of scenes, each one opening a very specific fork in the road for your characters. And those forks aren't interchangeable. They unfold in a deliberate progression that forces your characters to face parts of their internal conflict. So let's start at the very beginning with the first type of scene, the inciting incident. Obviously, this isn't an inciting incident in the traditional sense, the one that kicks off your story, but it's the one that sets off carefully designed progressions known as sequences. Sequences are one part of the storytelling frameworks that have developed called the story pillars method, which has received an overwhelming amount of success among fiction writers. It was designed to build on what already works and to fill the gaps where most writers are usually left in the dark. So if you'd like to dive deeper into the full method, make sure to subscribe. Right, so every sequence begins with an inciting incident, a scene that shakes the ground beneath your character's feet and destabilizes the current status quo, whether it is your protagonist or simply the POV character in focus. Speaking of which, sequences are structured a tad differently depending on whether your story follows a single protagonist or multiple point of view. But don't worry, we'll get to that in a minute. For now, let's look at a sequence from one of my favorite TV series, Desperate Housewives. In this sequence, we follow Susan, a single mom hiding a pretty dark secret. She accidentally sets her neighbor, Edie Britt's house on fire. And Edie isn't just a neighbor. She's also Susan's romantic rival. Both women are interested in the new guy on the street, Mike Delfino. During the chaos of the accident, Susan drops a measuring cup without realizing it, which is later found by another neighbor, Martha Huber. What triggers the sequence is when Martha eventually realizes that the measuring cup belongs to Susan. So the inciting incident scene is when Martha visits Susan. She shows up with a pie, polite, even generous on the surface.
Mrs. Huber.
Hello, Susan. I made you a pie.
Oh, wow. Why?
Do I need a motive to do something nice?
Until Martha finally accuses her of setting Eddie's house on fire and pulls out the measuring cup as evidence. Susan denies it, but things quickly begin to escalate, pushing us straight into the second type of scene, the progressive complications. This is where things get messy for your characters and tension starts stacking up. One complication can work, but stacking escalating challenges makes your protagonist's world increasingly unstable and far more immersive for your reader. These complications can be external, things happening around them, or internal, shifts in their thoughts, feelings, or gut instincts. Back in Desperate Housewives, we see the stakes climb pretty fast. After denying Martha's accusation, Susan runs into her at the grocery store.
You shouldn't be rude to me, Susan. Your secret is not an easy burden to bear. That insurance company is putting Edie through hell. But still, I've said nothing.
Well,
And the longer it takes for her to get payment, the longer she'll be staying with me. Eating me out of house and home. Using up my hot water.
Martha hints that if Susan doesn't pay for her groceries, she'll turn her in. It's blackmail, and Susan gives in. Sooner or later, all that pressure that you've piled on your characters will snap, which brings us to the third type of scenes, the turning point. This is the twist that drives the sequence in an irreversible direction. It forces your protagonist to confront the very dilemma set in motion by the inciting incident scene, a choice between 2 or more paths, each carrying real consequences for your characters. In other words, what started the sequence as disruption now hardens into decision. In Desperate Housewives, the turning point hits when Susan comes home to a voicemail from Martha, this time demanding $600 to replace her broken water heater.
I need to talk to you. My water heater just burst and it's going to cost me $600 to get a new one, and I can't afford that.
The blackmail has escalated far beyond groceries, and Susan realizes that if she doesn't act, things will only spiral. That realization pushes us into the next type of scene, the crisis and contemplation. Quick question while we're here, and feel free to answer in the comments. I was wondering if you were already structuring your story using sequences, or if this was a new way for you to look at your draft. So yeah, let me know in the comments. All right, so the crisis and contemplation scene is where the emotional weight of the inciting incident scene finally lands. If you're anything like me, you've probably agonized here, debating what your character would really do, because acting will cost them something, but so will doing nothing. In Desperate Housewives, there are actually 2 crisis and contemplation scenes in this sequence. First, Susan tells her daughter the whole truth about the fire and Martha's blackmail. This leads to a dialogue where Susan says that she's considering turning herself in to the police and hoping that they understand it was an accident. But her daughter, Julie, points out the consequences. Doing so would mean losing custody of her.
You can't do that. Julie, I don't think they'll throw me in jail. I mean, it was an accident.
Dad won't care if it was an accident. You know he'll just use this as an excuse to reopen custody.
In the second scene, Susan and Julie weigh another option, breaking into Martha's house to retrieve the measuring cup. Susan hesitates since it means involving Judy in a break-in, but Julie plays devil's advocate. Technically, it's not theft, since the measuring cup is theirs to begin with. After contemplating the costs of each option, your protagonist eventually makes a choice, and that decision launches the next type of scene, the climax. This is where the choice turns into action and the plan plays out on the page. In Desperate Housewives, Susan and Judy wait for Martha to leave, stage a frisbee game on the street, and throw it into Martha's garden as cover for Julie to sneak in and retrieve the measuring cup. And once the plan has played out, there's still one final step, because every sequence needs to show us not just the action, but the consequences. It's that closing scene that reveals what's changed and whether your character's new normal is stronger or shakier than before. And that final scene type is the resolution. The resolution scene is where we see the consequences of the climax, the ripple effect of the choice your protagonist made. It marks a clear before and after, both externally and internally, and it closes the sequence by revealing a new status quo, even if it's temporary. In Desperate Housewives, Martha visits Susan again, but this time everything has changed. Susan is waiting for her outside, symbolizing that she won't let Martha invade her home or her personal space again.
You took it, didn't you?
Good evening, Mrs. Hooper.
It's my own fault for not hiding the cup. Obviously, if you're capable of arson, I should have known you'd be capable of breaking and entering.
I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Hooper.
And unlike at the beginning, Susan no longer denies that the measuring cup was hers.
I suppose you destroyed it.
Again, I don't know what you're talking about, but yeah, I did.
So when designing sequences for your own novel or when revising your draft, ask yourself, what disruption launches this sequence and how does it reframe your character's status quo? How will the next scene keep raising pressure, stacking new costs, obstacles, or details that make the situation harder to escape? What scene makes it impossible for your protagonist to ignore the problem? What scene will show the characters weighing the options and the unavoidable consequences of each? What scene shows the chosen path being played out on the page? And finally, what scene shows how the character's status quo is now different from the opening of the sequence and how that change echoes forward into what's next? Now, I get asked this all the time, if you've got multiple POVs, do they all follow the same sequence structure? The short answer is no. Each point of view carries its own chain, but let me show you what that looks like. In a multi-POV story like Desperate Housewives or even Game of Thrones, each character runs on their own internal sequence, meaning their own inciting incident, progressive complications, turning point, crisis and contemplation, climax, and resolution. If we start simple, here's what that can look like. Imagine Chapter 1 follows POV 1. That could be the inciting incident of Sequence A. Chapter 2 switches to POV 2. And that's the inciting incident of Sequence B. Then Chapter 3 returns to POV 1 with a progressive complication scene for Sequence A. Chapter 4 switches back to POV 2 for a progressive complication scene in Sequence B, and so on, so forth. But in practice, it's rarely this neat. Sequences don't all move at the same pace. One POV might need several progressive complication scenes before hitting a turning point scene, while another could be ready to escalate much faster. So you could end up with something like this. Chapter 11 is the inciting incident of Sequence C for POV 1, while Chapter 12 jumps straight into the turning point scene of Sequence D for POV 2. The key idea is this: each POV still follows the same internal order of scene types. Those chains might weave together in your novel, but each one needs to stand on its own as a complete sequence. So there you have it, sequences, and not just cause and effect, but the deliberate chain that actually makes your story work. You can use them to fast-track plotting from scratch, or if you're revising, you can use them to spot missing scene types that weakened the flow. Once your sequences are solid, the next step is to master the scenes inside them. I've made a full breakdown on that, which you can watch right here. And if it's not ready yet, then you'll find here my deep dive on dialogue instead, where I break down the Martha and Susan scene that kicked off this sequence. Writers have said that video made dialogue clicked for them like nothing else before. I'm Julian Maylet, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.